Hi, and today's podcast, we're speaking to Georgina Poole. Georgina gives us insights into working in mining, construction, and running the Leading Safely podcast. Stay tuned.
Welcome to Health and Safety Conversations. Here's your host, Tom Bourne.
All right. Hello and welcome to Georgina Poole. Georgina, how are you doing today?
I'm good, thanks, Tom. How are you?
Oh, excellent. It's about 33 degrees over here in Port Hedland. We are
Nice.
living the dream. I think winter lasted 2 weeks. So, it's been quite nice. All right. Georgina, I've known you for a number of years now. Watched your career progress with great interest. Been very proud of what you've been able to achieve. But some of the listeners may not know a bit about you. So can you tell us a bit about you and your background, and then tell us what you're up to now?
Sure. So obviously, as a safety professional, been in the industry for about 16 years. Started out in mining, so across the Bowen Basin, Queensland, Central Queensland area, working my way through various mine sites there. Spent some time in construction, not the most favourable of my experiences. And then obviously spent some time in Western Australia, working on a few of the really cool kind of mine sites over there for about 4 years in time frame speaking. So a lot of my career has been mining, oil and gas, and those high risk kind of industries. Working my way through, had a baby, so decided we wanted to come back from WA and put our base back in Queensland, which is where I'm born and bred, obviously, and get back to our support network. So that was the reason for leaving WA and upping and moving across the country again, back to Queensland. Since being back in Queensland, I took a step away from those boots on the ground type safety advisor roles, which I'd done for basically my whole entire career. Spent some time in a training position and then kind of got almost headhunted into the role that I'm currently in with Lydia Group as a health and safety consultant, where I'm developing their HSE offering to the market. And I guess more excitedly, also working on my own professional development through my health and safety podcast called the Leading Safely podcast with Georgina Poole, obviously.
Excellent. And I've had a listen to the four of the episodes. Excellent work. I'm really impressed. A few things you mentioned there that I just want to go on to. Construction industry, not your favourite period of time.
No.
Care to elaborate?
Sure. So I spent just on 6 months roughly working for a major player in the building and construction industry. Unfortunately, I was crying every 2 to 3 days. I was arguing with people in senior management positions for basic things like shelter for the guys out on site. I paid for toilets out of my own salary. I put up hemp fencing. I was getting my hands dirty. And we were doing things like providing inductions out the back of the ute. Not the most favourable environment. Construction for me there's a huge difference, and it's where you can, make a great impact as a safety professional. But the stress and the emotional kind of overload that goes along with being in that role at that time was not where I wanted to be. Not the nicest experience, but definitely, I'm not saying no to everyone in safety. I'm just saying it's a very tough space to be in, and you have to be within the right organisation with the right support networks in place. And I unfortunately didn't experience that.
Yeah. I've got a few horror stories of my own, but not in construction. This was on mining sites where, being the highly intelligent person I was working security. And for example, our employer decided we were drinking too much water in the middle of summer, and so limited us to one of those big bottles of water for 2 shifts per day, and that was good. Or taking away chairs, so you have to stand on concrete for 12-hour shift, which left one of the guys almost crippled. But I understand where you're coming from when you have that really poor culture. They're really poor understanding of what it's about, and it's seen as just a simple thing that you have to do, the ticking boxes exercise.
Correct.
It's sort of soul destroying, and you walk away from that and you go, never doing that again. So
that's exactly what it was. Yeah.
All right. What does the Lydia Group do? Because I'm a bit naive.
So Lydia Group is a project management consultancy firm. They have, commercial managers, project managers, all across, procurement, a whole variety of areas. And the HSE space is something new that I've been brought in to develop. So we don't currently have HSE related clients. That's something I'm currently working on at the moment.
Excellent. Well qualified too. All right. Your podcast. All right. Going to put you on the spot. Why?
Sure. Okay. Well, I obviously attend a lot of functions and events within the health and safety space. And what I found was I was attending all of these fantastic events with all of these fantastic presenters. However, the information the presenters sometimes provide is not at a level that I feel guys that are in boots on the ground positions would be able to understand. So whilst my podcast is called Leading Safely, and of course is aimed at every level of the organisation, the aim and the hearts and minds that I want to influence is the CEO level, but it's also those supervisors and lower level kind of positions that are out there talking to personnel that really can create that change that we need to see in our industry. So I speak at a level that I hope identifies with the guys and girls who are on a site, and can identify with what I'm saying. I'm not talking in psychological degree speak. I'm not talking in, MBA level. I'm talking at a level I feel is convenient. And the time frame, so my podcast, but my episodes are always around that 10 to 15 minute space. It's because I want people to go, well, I could sit in the lunchroom for 10 minutes and catch up on how to, positively influence, or I could, be in the gym, after camp and do, a podcast and listen to it. So it's not aimed to be 2 hours of your time. It's just a quick listen while you're on a commute or something like that.
Excellent. I agree with you. I believe it or not, remember from episode 1, you define what safety leadership was and who you were aiming it at. So that was excellent. You weren't aiming it necessarily at the university types who do the higher research, but just the people who can make difference. And I think you're absolutely hit the nail on the head. I think the biggest difference that can happen on any site with safety is when you influence the frontline supervisor. They're the ones who tend to have most control of what happens on their site. It's fine to have all these wonderful policies and procedures, but if they're not actually enforced, if they're not followed through, if it's done nudge, nudge, wink, wink, and we'll do it when we're being watched, everything tends to fall apart. Yeah. So, no, that's good. Okay. You mentioned a little bit of time in training and education. How did that go?
I actually found the training space really fantastic from a personal recognition and reward space. So I found getting feedback from students, saying how great it is that I'm providing examples that they can relate to, and that kind of real life experience was really fantastic. I thoroughly enjoyed it and would happily step back into any kind of, training orientated role. I did do education directly out of high school. So I did spend time as a teacher. It's just my career took a mining orientated, kind of role instead of staying teaching with school children instead of adults.
All right. I'm going to ask your opinion. I may already have an inkling or a bit of a clue about it.
Sure.
All right. What's the difference between good quality safety training and less than good quality safety training?
The trainer. 100%. You could have really bad content and have a fantastic trainer who can make it identifiable with real world experience and be at level with students, and the content goes out the window. In the same instance, you could have fantastic content but have a really, really dodgy trainer and it means nothing. Yeah. It's all about how you convey that message in that frontline face-to-face environment. And if you can really give real life examples and show the students that you've been there, or that you can provide those examples they may come across, that's what makes the training stick. Yep. It's not you can stand up and talk. Anyone can stand up and talk. It's about having that experience. And we all know, you can go to uni and become an educator, fair call, but that doesn't mean you're going to be great at what you do in any industry, not just training.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree with you. I've seen some marvelous people. I've seen marvelous people from industry who can't teach. I've seen some wonderful teachers who have no real life example, and they're like presenting things out of textbooks, and people are going, well, how does that apply? And they've got nothing. But yeah, it takes a combination of both. And I think if you can't explain a concept to somebody in terms that they're going to see the relevance of, or the what they can put into their own world, it's kind of pointless. It's kind of pointless.
Yep.
So I'm going to ask you, because you've been on both sides, you've been on industry, you've been an educator as well, or trainer, facilitator, whatever the names they call them these days. What's the one concept that you think, when you teach people about safety, the one concept that they struggle to understand the most?
For me, it's around the space on hazard and risk management, only because I've seen what that result kind of looks like when you're conducting a risk assessment or facilitating some sort of risk management speak out on site. I had senior level kind of geotechnical gentlemen out on site say that they were basically going close to a 10-meter drop, a hole, a void, and they were using their feet to tap the ground as their control measure. And when I asked, what do you do if someone falls? One of them actually gestured and put his hand out and grabbed the shirt of the other. And he said that was their control for, well, if one's going to fall, it was like, I'm just going to grab him and like literally reach out and grab his shirt. So we didn't need to have working at height for fall arrest or any sort of measures. That's what we did. But on their risk assessment, on their JHA, they listed PPE as an item of control. They listed tying their shoelaces up as a method of control, but they failed to identify the 10-meter drop that they could potentially fall over.
Yeah.
So again, it comes back to that training and that interaction. And I often ask myself, what kind of training did they have that unfortunately missed the boat when it came to hazard and risk management? And when I did training, I spent a lot of time in giving those examples and saying, slips, trips and falls is not a hazard. It's what happens to you when, and then give me those. That's the hazard. And, there's a difference between an okay risk assessment and a quality risk assessment that takes the time. They're not done in the office. They're not done, on the bus. They're not done by senior management. So it's the hazard and risk management, to tie that question off for you. That for me is the real thing that just all levels of positions just don't critically get. Excellent.
One of those things, you talked about your podcast, and I'm quite a fan of it myself. If I wanted to listen, or if one of the listeners wanted to listen to your podcast, where would they go?
So to listen to it, you go to any of your normal podcast providers, Spotify, Google, Apple as well. I'm not discriminatory against Apple users. But otherwise, you can also catch it on YouTube. You literally just have to search for Leading Safely. And if not, you can go to my website, leadingsafely.com.au, and you can go to your normal provider via that.
Excellent. A couple of little bit of questions that I just have here. Industrial manslaughter came in and it's been adopted by most states and territories. We've seen that each state and territory that does have it has their own penalties. Some of them are higher than others, some of them less. And then we have New South Wales, which has steadfastly said it will not be introducing industrial manslaughter. What's your thoughts about industrial manslaughter? Is it required? Was it needed? Is there something that we could do to basically see that it was never needed? And what's your opinion about whether it's actually been successful in implementation or
not? So I'm going to be judgmental here, and my opinion is it 100% needs to be implemented across all jurisdictions and states. The problem I'm seeing is that there is so much, disjointedness between what Queensland, New South Wales, Victoria does, and also the penalties with each of the states. The individual judge on the case has the ability to change things exponentially. And as I track the different cases that are coming through, I'm seeing things like, sure, they might have pled guilty, but then because they're a good, upstanding citizen, they've not had any previous records. There's all these things that get factored into the sentencing component. It changes the outcome, So it almost makes it like pointless. Why did you go down the line of taking them through court and putting both sides of the card, through all that kind of stress and overload, etc., and then have it eventuate with no criminal record, no criminal conviction, because he was a good, upstanding citizen. And I did actually get the opportunity to ask a lawyer, and he said there's so many things that come into play, Georgina, with the sentencing, that they do want to be very humanistic and take a realistic approach. But my question is, like, you have people like Christopher Castanedi in New South Wales, 18-year-old, 2 weeks after his 18th-year-old birthday, that passed away on site with conditions that were horrendous. Should there be that kind of consideration given to the director of that company that blatantly knows things are unsafe, that blatantly chooses to take no action to stop these conditions from occurring on site and blatantly puts lives at risk? And my answer is no. There should be industrial manslaughter, but it needs to be applied correctly, and it needs to be done so there is punishment for actions that are taken or not taken in this way.
Yeah, the humanistic approach when making judgments against people is one of those great notions, but it doesn't bring the person back. They're gone. They've missed out. Their families missed out on the rest of their life, their children, their grandchildren, etc., etc.
Yep.
It's gone,
and it's reckless misconduct as well. Like, I mean, if you accidentally forgot that the drinking tap was turned on and the water overflowed and someone slipped on it, that's very different to you knew the risk assessment didn't count to that, like these types of risks, and you allowed it to occur. Yeah. I'm not talking about, someone slipping. I'm talking about scaffolding collapse and he died. And not only that, but there was no emergency management procedures. There was no training. There was, like when you tick all those boxes, you can't just get, sorry, mate, thanks for coaching football, but we're not going to send you to jail because you're a good, upstanding citizen.
Yeah, I agree.
I'm not okay with that.
No. I can tell you now, when I was back in Queensland, the result of the first industrial manslaughter case came out. I was working with some really good trainers at the time. There was a few of us who followed that case pretty closely. And when the verdict came out, we were gutted. And we were gutted for weeks. Yep. It was just like, we're saying 5 years in jail doesn't meet the maximum 5 years in jail, doesn't meet community expectations. So we've introduced this new legislation with a 20 years maximum, $10 million fine, and we got nothing. The person spent zero time in jail. And the other thing about industrial manslaughter, or even any of the category fines, that students, I find when we're first teaching them about it, almost are in a state of disbelief, is none of that money that gets through court ever gets to the victims' families or to the person who's injured. None of it. They have to go and sue civilly. So they may have already lost someone or be permanently incapacitated, and now they have to sue the company that was responsible in order to basically, get some measure of compensation. I'm not sure it's
terrible, isn't it?
Yeah. But as I said, West Australia's brought it in now, which is good, and I think Western Australia. Well, you know what WA stands for, don't you?
Yeah, wait a while. Some. 1984 was their Occupational Health and Safety Act. They still had employees listed until the update was what happened to workers. We don't have them. I'm sorry.
But they've gone from the most lax forms of fines and penalties to probably the harshest. Well, proof's in the pudding. We'll see when we get a few more prosecutions underway. I know some of the people for WA WorkSafe, and I know they're committed to changing things, but it's a slow process. They're starting from a very low level of knowledge and skill, but they'll get there. I'm confident they'll get there. Interesting enough, when they did change over, and they did it early this year, once they completed their regulations, that's with an S, we ended up with 3 sets of regulations because we had to be better than everyone else.
Of course.
I don't know why, and I can say from a teaching point of view, teaching a class 3 sets of regulations is not a lot of fun for anyone. It's just difficult. Okay. Safety stories. All right. What's the worst, without mentioning names or companies, what's the worst safety incident, accident, situation you may have seen yourself?
It will have to go back to my time in construction, unfortunately. Working in school-based environments with open trenches, with temporary fencing not being in place, and then having to come back to the office to argue with the senior level managers that provide the funding to basically argue why there should be a site shed, why there should be temp fencing, why they should have certain things in place. And then having to quote legislation. That was the hardest part. It's like, these are the basic fundamentals. You're not even complying from a legislative standpoint, let alone giving, a good reputation to the company with what you're doing at the moment. So hence the crying. It wasn't necessarily what I was saying. It was knowing that you've got 18 and 19-year-old apprentice carpenters in charge of, as in they're in site supervisor roles, $15, $20 million projects. And they don't clearly understand their roles and responsibilities when it comes to a health and safety, perspective. So it was really hard.
It's one of those common things, and I'm finding it more and more in Western Australia at the moment, that a lot of people in supervisionary roles, or they've just stepped into supervision, they have no idea. They have no idea of their legal obligations. They have no idea that they should provide any level of supervision for the staff that they manage. It is scary to me. It is scary. I can honestly tell you, I've been dealing with an organisation that's fairly close to me at the moment, and the safety team, I'm not talking about educators who teach safety, but the safety team itself asked us for some PowerPoint slides about legislation because it's deemed that we know more about it than them. And that's a scary thing for me, that you have safety professionals. I mean, it's a good thing that they're putting their hand up, but
that's really tough.
One of the things that they also seem to struggle with is the role of the health and safety rep. They, at the moment, I can honestly say, are thinking that the safety rep is part of the safety team and that they can delegate tasks out to the safety rep.
I've seen that.
we have these big discussions where legislation is brought out and gently said that, no, that's not the case. You still have the responsibility for making the workplace safe. You still actually have to do inspections as part of representing the PCBU. But they're still on that. You're the safety rep. You should be doing this and that. And it's like, there's nothing in the legislation for that, but there is actually a lot in the legislation about risk management of the PCBU. But
it's tough.
It's a bit of a battle at the moment, and I think education. Well, some areas it's a matter of drip feeding, and hopefully it will make a difference. All right, on your desk. I'm assuming you have a desk.
I do.
All right, one thing on your desk that means a lot to you, and why?
It's a techie thing called a Facebook portal. It's basically a photo frame that also lets me speak to family and friends overseas and in Australia, and it flashes up all the images I've added to Facebook as well. So it's good because when I'm doing interviews like this, when I'm at my home office, I can, type away, and then in the background, people will see images of my husband, my child, etc., kind of flash up. And for me, it kind of grounds that home office environment back to, it's still family and you are still at home, and home never used to be the space you worked in up until recently. So
good. Speaking of home office, that brings up a really good topic. Home offices, we all went to home office, remote learning, remote working with COVID, and a lot of people now being asked to come back to the workplace. But the home office, my God, try and get the concept across to anyone working from home that, the policies and procedures of your workplace still apply to your home. And that means things like having a safe workplace. And that means that perhaps the employer should somehow manage to do some sort of inspection. Now, obviously it's a bit hard for them to actually send someone out to homes and do inspections. That's just, when you're talking about large scale companies, that's not feasible. But have you heard or seen anything that would be innovative in helping an employer ensure they provide a safe workplace for workers who are working remotely at home, for example?
Other than basically scanning the room. So I've seen some employers request a video of the room. But I mean, if you were cheeky, you could go to someone else's really fancy house that has no obstacles whatsoever, get your phone and then, video record what you're doing. I work with a lot of organisations that have standard risk assessments as well, where you tick, yes, no, I have no obstacles, etc. But I think it would be great if there was some sort of application that let you live kind of scan around a room and it identified, well, hey, actually there's, bits and pieces here that need to be fixed. And that got recorded so that, as a safety professional, you could assess that and say to the person, hey, perhaps you need to look at doing this.
I know my lovely wife, she works for BU and she does a lot of work from home. At one stage there, they would literally, you get your webcam off and you'd literally, at the start of each meeting, you'd have to show people your workspace. Which it's a better than nothing concept. If I was to tilt my camera just over that way for a little bit, you'd see moving boxes everywhere, because we're in the process of moving and it's just out of frame because we don't want to show that. Yeah. Excellent. All right. Look, Georgina, thanks very much for being on the show today. I really do appreciate your time. Keep up the great work with the podcast.
Thank you.
And hopefully we might get you on for a group discussion a bit later on, or either later on this year or maybe early next year, if that would be all right.
Sounds great. Thanks, Tom.
Excellent. Thanks, Georgina.
No worries.
And I'm trying to turn off the recording. There we go.
Thanks for listening to Health and Safety Conversations with Tom Bourne. Until next time, stay safe and enjoy the rest of your week.